lovely.
Good morning, everyone. How are you?
Good.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. It's great to see you.
Good to see you as well. Thank you, Principal Spezio, for the lovely note. I appreciate it about the condolences for my mom. I appreciate
No,
it.
my condolences. I'm glad that you read that, and let me just say in person, I just I give you a lot of thought and prayers, and you're a very strong person.
Thank you. Thank you. I truly appreciate it. Thank you. Everyone, thank you for setting up this meeting. I truly am excited about 2021. I know that as educators, you all that are still in the fight, like Principal Mannino and all of you that are working very, very hard on a daily basis to make sure that our children are receiving the education that they deserve, even during this pandemic. It's been tough. So we definitely appreciate you for continuing to do the work. Great to see you, Miss Donia. I haven't seen you since in a couple months.
I know.
Thank you for being here. And I know that you have been working hard on this transportation issue, and I am thinking that this is what this is going to be about, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, all right. So the floor is yours. Any way that I can be helpful? Great to see you, Miss Lee. Everybody, I'm sorry, I'm calling everybody out. I'm just excited to see everybody. I know that wish we could be face to face in the same room, but still doing the work, and that's what's most important. So, John, the floor is yours, or Dr. Spezio, if you want to kick it off, whoever wants to take it from here.
I think John will.
Yeah, we got started on this back in 2012 when School 16 was being closed because supposedly it wasn't in good enough shape. I think it was primarily they were trying to close 3 schools in Rochester, and what often happens is one gets closed, and if nobody complains, it stays closed. And fortunately, my wife had been a volunteer there about 5 years earlier, and I had gotten a chance to go over, take some pictures of the kids, and also experience what the school was like. And I thought it really had a nice atmosphere. There was a lot of community involvement with it. And when I heard from the teacher that my wife had volunteered with, she called me one morning and said they're going to be closing the school. And who knows, if I hadn't had that connection with that teacher and hadn't been to the school, would I have noticed, and would people have, pulled together to fight the event? We got the Southwest Common Council to set up their education committee again, and we used that as the platform to try to rally people. We got Eleanor Coleman put me in touch with Ralph Spezio and with Mary Adams, who was a school board member at the time, and we found out what had happened, the good things that had happened at School 17 back in the 90s, and John Lang and I really thought that that's the way to go, is to get a community school going at School 16 when it reopens. The board agreed to renovate it and reopen it, and then we found out that School 10 over on Congress Avenue was going to get closed and shipped over to Building 1 in Cobb's Hill, and we were able to convince them to keep that on Congress Avenue because there's a lot of school-age children in that area, and took us another 6 months to get agreements on that. But the objective that we had was to try to model things on what Ralph had done. The School 17 was getting renovated at the time, and Ralph went back to try to recreate the dream that was there before, and Caterina followed in his footsteps, and we kept a close eye on School 17 to have a model on which to base what we were going to do. Eventually, we had 10 schools in the Rochester area, the most recent bunch that went into receivership, and one of the things that they were picking to help them get out of receivership is to become community schools, and that was, from what we saw, a great opportunity to really get that to happen. But we knew just how much work Caterina and Ralph had done over at 17, and we knew that people were underestimating what really was going to go into having all these schools become community schools. We're involved with 5 schools in the Southwest. I sit on a community engagement team at 3, 10, 16, 19, Wilson Foundation Academy.
John, just really quickly, do we know, or does somebody else know what's going to happen with School 44?
That's still, I think, up in the air. Depends a lot what the money's going to be like. They were going to have that be a preschool center, and I talked to one of the teachers there just recently, and things were still a bit uncertain. So I'm still hoping that we can keep that building and have it be perhaps a preschool center. But right now, we want to make sure that we're encouraging the right things to happen at the various schools that are becoming community schools. I know that Monique is doing just great work over at School 19, and I hope that all of our soon-to-be community schools in the Southwest do as well. Of course, right now, COVID has put a big kink in everything that everyone is doing, but it's also an opportunity that we have to seize, because the disruption that COVID has caused throughout the nation and in Rochester, it's also, we've also got the Black Lives Matter movement in all of the country, and that's showing the terrible systemic racism that has devastated the hearts of many of our cities throughout the country, and we have to make sure that we put the resources into fixing the schools in these areas.
John.
And one of the things that
John, so that I know that we have a tight agenda here, so I understand the history. I understand where we were and where you would like to go. So I know that there's the major issue here is the busing and the transportation reimbursement for students that live within a 1.5 mile.
Mm-hmm.
at school number 17, I believe it was a grant by the Farish Foundation that allowed for those students to be able to be transported or picked up at their home within that 1.5 miles and bused to school. So where are you with legislation from the state to cover that cost? How do suburban school districts actually pay for this? Because I know suburban school districts also have don't have that requirement. So so I guess those are my two questions. If someone can answer that for me.
Mayor, let me address this, and I'll try to be brief because there are other people on this call that have the answers that you just mentioned, and they have them at their fingertips. One of the things that flies over under the radar here, and it's been frustrating, is that let me just put it this way. People know that the very core of your work, the very core of your being and administration, is to make neighborhoods healthy and vibrant. I mean, that's really important work that you're doing, and you're spending thousands of hours and millions of dollars in that regard. We can see it. But the frustrating thing is that there are policies that are driving an agenda that is opposite of your work and your agenda. The state legislature, as you just mentioned, is encouraging the district because they reimburse for the money to bus kids from one end of the city to the other.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it really was an eye opener when school board member Liz Hallmark gathered a task force, and I was so happy to see there was a huge representation of parents and residents on that task force. John was part of it. And every single one of the parents said that this busing policy is destroying our neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
They said we were isolated to begin with, but then this is really driving the isolation. And it's driving the wedge between the authentic partnership that should be between parents and the school. So what I envision here is that, and I really hope that since I began in the fall of 1970 as a rookie teacher, I just have been so puzzled as to why the city school district has circled the wagons and not partnered with the city. Both of you are operating, moving in the same direction. In the swimming pool, you're swimming in the same direction. There is absolutely no reason why you can't link arms. And the reason I did the partnerships in the 90s is that I always complained that I didn't have enough resources, but when I linked arms and made partnerships with community organizations, I had more resources than an army. And the fact is that the city of Rochester, you have great resources, Mayor, for lobbying, much more than the school district. But if you link arms in that regard, I think we can get a waiver from the state legislature quite quickly in order to implement in September. Now, not all communities are conducive to having community schools, but many are. And the superintendent can even begin to make planning for September and creating and training principals for the skill sets that are needed for operating a true community school. Until that superintendent gets a waiver of flexibility to say, let me apply the money in a way that helps parents and families and children walk to a community school, walking school buses, mini school buses, and so on and so forth. Even putting two-way radios in the hands of crossing guards, like I did. So my hope is that we can start a partnership, start collaboration between the city of Rochester and the city school district, like it should be, have been forever. We can start with one focus, just this one little thing, that will create, when you throw this stone into the pond, it will make great waves. And I think that it may start the path forward for collaboration. That's my dream.
So a very specific ask, Mayor Warren, and something that it is very tangible. You asked about the suburban districts. So there's currently child safety zone legislation. It's at law 3635B. And there is an application through the New York State Department of Education that allows districts with fewer than 125,000 residents to designate a child safety zone for reimbursability and transportation. All of those points, the point system for the child safety zone is totally centered around infrastructure. It's totally about highways, sidewalks, crosswalks, etc. Yet the language and the spirit behind it is, it says, when we talk about equity and access, transportation may be provided for children who would not be otherwise eligible because their most direct walking route to school will traverse a hazardous zone. Now, we talk about hazardous zones as a 4-lane highway, but not the walk from Saratoga Pharmacy to School 17. And so School 17 is slated in the reopening to not have 1.5 transportation. After we've done all of the neighborhood recruitment, all of the neighborhood building, essentially the heart of this was to meet our neighbors, to create the school as a center of an urban village, to work with our village to better our community.
Mm-hmm.
And now, those parents who put their trust have no voice in their child having access to schooling. The other difference in the suburbs is that the residents vote on the school budget.
Mm-hmm.
And in those big 5 districts, that's not the case.
Okay, so this is good because we have actual legislation that we can refer to, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I think that if you could send me the child safety legislation, that bill, right? What we can do is I will talk to the superintendent and ask her to join with me to go to our state delegation to ask them to put in legislation to allow for us to create a child safety zone, right? So what would happen is that, we could put in some specific criteria, right? So maybe what this would do is we would say to the state, every school or every neighborhood school may not become a child safety zone, but these are the factors that we would need to look at, or the district would need to look at in order to allow for that to happen.
Right.
I think that if we are able to, because there's specific legislation, and as you said, it's about equity. So one of the things, and I'm glad that you have this, is because this is how I was able to get the actual traffic court in the city of Rochester, right? Because, for decades, if you received a speeding ticket in the city of Rochester, you were never able to get that reduced. But if you were in Gates or in Pittsford or somewhere else, you were able to go before a judge and get that ticket reduced. And so we were able to show the inequity in the law, right? So why is it that just 10 minutes away, there's a state law that allows for this to happen, but it doesn't allow for it to happen here? So that is a different argument than what was presented before. And so I think that we have a better chance of getting the delegation to jump on board for equity under this child safety program that would allow us to make these child safety zones based on children walking to school, because we also have 4-lane highways in the city. So crossing over Lau Avenue or crossing over J Street, these busy roads, they're busy roads. So why does it not apply to city when when you have the same thing, the same transportation issues as the suburbs? So So Principal Mannino, if you could email me that, I will talk to the superintendent, see where she's at, and we, need to set up a state delegation meeting, but that's what we would be looking to do. And I think that we can push that, because I have precedent where I can say, look, this is it, this is equity, this is what we're talking about. We should have the same access to be able to create these zones as suburban districts do.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the argument around the ethical nature of this, but there's also the heart, right? The pathos, the emotional nature of it. If we could dedicate some communication support, because I think actually filming the walking path to school, that particular walk, Saratoga Pharmacy is only 1.1 miles from School 17. Walks you past multiple sexual predators that are online. Walks you past an alley where a dead body was found. Walks you past the site's Delco demolition site. That would be your walking path to school.
So
I know it's two ways, because it highlights some of the challenges, but it's also, I think, part of that argument that would really draw an emotional piece forward.
So I agree with you that, I'll just be frank, and I don't think that that pulls at my heartstrings, but I think that we all know that what pulls at our emotional strings and all of that, that it hasn't moved this legislature, it hasn't moved the district at all, right? So what we know is the right thing to do because it's the right thing to do. Doesn't necessarily, when it should work, it's a no-brainer. People still haven't moved on that, right? But when you can point to a specific law that is unequally applied, it is wrong. And that's where I've had the most success, if I can point to the inequity. Because what they'll say is like, okay, well, Mayor, why don't y'all just clean up the streets? Why don't you have more officers? Why don't you just clean up the neighborhoods? That, they shouldn't have to walk by that. They shouldn't, and so that gives them a way out, per se, to say, this is your problem, and now you're trying to make it my problem. And what I'm saying is that I agree with you 100%. Getting those heart and that emotional feel is good and for parents, and getting them involved and asking for it. But I know what definitely moves the legislature is to be able to point to the law that is inequitable. And here, this is inequitable. I can show that you have a 4-lane highway that these kids have to walk over, that live by Saratoga Pharmacy. So why is it that we can't create a school safety zone and allow for them to have transportation?
And to expand the definition of that safety zone, because right now it is solely limited to highway infrastructure and traffic. That's how you get.
Well, I think that we asked to change the definition, but that's a highway infrastructure. Lake Avenue, Lau Avenue is a state road. It's a highly traveled road. Okay, how many cars actually go down that street on a daily basis? How many cars cross over, Lake Avenue? How many cars travel down Genesee Street? How many cars travel down, Arnett Boulevard or road? These are all highways. Most of them are state roads. So, I think that if you ask me, the best way to tackle this argument is from the inequity, and that is it. You have the law, let me work on the law.
That's pretty exciting, Mayor. When we talk about equity, one of our members here on this call researched and found that most of the suburban districts provide door-to-door transportation for the children. That's just unconscionable when it comes to equity regarding children in the city.
Good morning, Madam Mayor. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Alicia?
Wonderful. Good to see you this morning. So yes, I did some calling and some research on within some of the districts as far as their rules for transportation. And some of the districts, their transportation rules graduate as far as what grades a student is in. For example, in Penfield, K through 8, students that live more than a half a mile, they get bused. In Pittsburgh, students K through 8 all are eligible for transportation.
Right.
And then-
I think that from what I'm hearing that from Principal Mannino is that the district gets to set what they believe is a child safety zone based on the criteria that's set out in that particular law. So if our district, so we don't have the option but to only get reimbursed for 1.5, anything above 1.5 miles. That's the option that you have. However, right now, but suburban districts can create these child safety zones that allows for them to get reimbursed underneath 1.5 miles because they can create these child safety zones. And so what I'm saying is that the argument that we will attack this from is that we need the ability in the city of Rochester to create child safety zones based on the pathway to and from school that encompasses highways and infrastructure in roads that are traveled, by thousands and thousands of cars. We can actually track that number. We can get data from, our transportation folks to say that, 10,000 cars drive down Lyle Avenue, but yet you want a year-old child to walk across this highway. Why is that? We don't necessarily have to come from a issue, that I know, which is also the issue that there's sexual predators that live there. We know what happens at Lyle Avenue. It's one of, it's one of our most drug infested areas. We don't necessarily have to come from that perspective, even though that's really what we're trying to deal with as well.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
So with this, there are different, so if it's the child safety zones, the reason that these different districts have different criteria on who gets a ride as far as distance, because it graduates. So some districts, again, all students are eligible to get a bus, and then other districts, you get a bus for shorter distances according to what grade you're in. So the younger kids are eligible at a shorter distance, and the high school students are eligible at a longer distance. So there is inequity as far as the difference between the suburban districts and the urban district as far as who gets a bus and at what age and what grade level.
Right. I think that we know we all agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Agree with that, and I think that our goal is really to get transportation for preschool to that's where we would start off at, right? I think that's where our lies. Let me, Brittany, if you can copy down that information that Principal Mannino just sent in the chat. I will talk to the superintendent and see if how she would want us to look at this collectively together or separate, and then I will we'll set up a meeting with our delegation to push this. I think that this is a good way to tackle this issue as an equity issue.
Wow, great, that's great.
And we have to realize also the fact that in the city, if you have a 1.5 mile reimbursement law like we do, you can always find a school that's 1.5 miles away. And parents, value being able to put their child on the bus in front of the house, and then they're free to get to a job. If we almost need to get to the point that we allow parents to pick their neighborhood school, which may be a 1/4 mile or a 1/2 mile away, and have the assurance up front they can get busing. Because it's the fear of having the child walking that drives many of them to pick schools that are on the other side of the city. Now, they may try to get to one of the great schools on the other side of the city. They go into a lottery. Most of them don't make it because there isn't that much room there. And then they pick another school that's 1.5 miles, but may be no better than the one down the street. They need to be able to get the assurance up front that their child will get busing. And that's one of the things that when we worked with Liz Hallmark that came out.
So I agree with you, John. I think that how we get there, how do we get to yes, right? So we've tackled this issue from the emotional issue and all of that, but we haven't tackled this issue from an equity issue. And so I think that this is the first time that I'm hearing that how it is allowed in suburban districts is through this child safety zone. So why don't we have child safety zone legislation in the city of Rochester in any urban school district that districts can create these zones based on these criteria? Okay, even if you say it's around infrastructure, I don't know any street, any school that is an urban school where children don't have to pass over a major road. Rather you're talking about Plymouth Avenue, you're talking about Jefferson Avenue, you're talking about Genesee Street, you're talking about Thurston, you're talking about, J Street, Lyle Avenue. So if it's based on infrastructure, even if that's the argument that they lose, then we can show based on our infrastructure that's a problem as well. So I think that we can get there. What I'll do is let me look at the information that was just provided. I will have Brittany set up a meeting with the superintendent for her and I to discuss this issue. Then to speak with our state delegation to then sponsor legislation to create these safety zones based on equity. And that's what we're going to push for. We have an example of how we were able to get them to move on this before with this traffic violations bureau. It was based on equity, and we'll get back to you in a couple of weeks and let you know where we are.
Okay.
I knew that you would have a strategic solution there, and this is really exciting.
Well, thank Principal Mannino, because as soon as she said that, I said, hey, listen, this is the way we gotta go. I think you can get it done this way. Now, I can't guarantee, but this is your best argument.
And with all the work that Caterina has done, we had that agreement with Bohan Vargas to do busing so we can make 17 schools back to a neighborhood school, then a community school, and that Caterina has done that. She's built those relationships with the parents and the neighbors in the community, but now they're pulling the busing from her. They're pulling that agreement from her, which is like pulling the rug right out from under her. So the fact that you have pursued this, Mayor, is really I'm levitating. I'm so happy.
And I'll talk to the superintendent about, you know, about that as well. I think that, you know, we can tackle this from the equity issue, but one of the things I think that, you know, you all need to do is, you know, for the school board's perspective, especially as it pertains to School 17 and the agreement, that parents need to stand up and say, listen, this was agreed to, and you brought my kid to school. And if you know, this is one of those things that you should probably talk to Empire Justice about, who has been working on the other on the special ed stuff. But they can say, like, look, I put my child here under the caveat that they would be provided transportation, and that they would be provided transportation for as long as they went to school here and all of that. And you cannot, I detrimentally rely on that. So you cannot take it away from us. So I think that that is a way for you to tackle it specifically as it pertains to school number 17. Get those parents to, you know, basically say they're going to file a lawsuit if they pull the transportation from them. They don't have a right to do that because they relied on that transportation when they decided to send their child to that school.
That's great. That's right.
We also have to remember that if we had just a blanket local busing exemption, that it would actually cost less to the state for us to have perhaps 25% of the kids going to their special school and the others getting bused locally. The two studies that I sent out today give some of those figures, and basically it kind of looks like we're talking about $4 million less if we have local busing and about 3/4 of the kids take advantage of that option. It becomes a nightmare for, you know, if what Caterina did through great effort at School 17, every other principal has to do the same thing for their school. It makes having a lot of community schools in Rochester that much harder, because it really, you know, you begin to have to get safety zones for each school. It's hard enough if you can just convince parents to make use of their local school, that they'll be able to walk to the school, to talk to teachers, that they won't have to take two buses to get to that school if there's a need to. We also should look at that, because I think it's something that would greatly simplify getting parents to choose to work with their neighborhood school, with their community school in the area. You know, when you look at the fact that it's probably going to cost less, it's almost a no-brainer for the state.
Well, the bottom line is that the strategy that the mayor has outlined, the strategic strategy that she's outlined in regarding to pursuing this, is foundational. Now, once that happens, now principals like Monique and others that are really chomping at the bit to have this happen for their schools can start building. The superintendent can start training these principals to go about doing what Caterina has done, and hopefully Caterina will be central to that training. And with the flexibility of transportation and the things that encompasses, then we can build neighborhood schools and then have them transform into true community schools like Caterina has done. Mm-hmm. It starts with the strategy that you just outlined there, and I'm so happy I mean, I'm just really so thrilled that, to hear how you're gonna pursue this.
Well, we'll all work, see what we can do to make it happen. I can't say that it may happen overnight, but when you point out disparities in the law and inequities that are clear and appear to be based on race or class, there's no denying it, right? So why does a suburban child that's crossing a highway get preference over an urban child that's crossing a highway?
And I don't know.
It doesn't make sense to me.
I don't know how much support we can give you, but if you need any support, we will do that in a heartbeat for you.
Okay.
As you
All
wish.
right. I'll definitely let you know. Principal Lee, did you have something that you wanted to add?
No, thank you for asking, though. Just the fact that Caterina has done so much work, and I am a receivership school, and community schools is a strategy for me, and local busing will make it amazing for my students and parents. Just in the virtual setting, our parent engagement has risen 50%, and I definitely contribute that to the fact that they're able to get on Zoom and to join meetings as opposed to trying to come back to school. So I really applaud your tactic in getting this done. Very smart. I love it, and I look forward to supporting it.
All right, wonderful. Ms. Wang, did you have something?
No, I work with the Southwest Rochester Communities Associations. I teach at UR, and I work with I teach courses that have community engaged components, and I work with Monique and John.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ms. Schroeder, do you have anything?
No, I just want to thank everyone and say this is emotionally very important to me. It's whatever I can do, I will.
Mhm.
To help out. Thank you for allowing us to be with you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Doc, anything?
Yes, thank you for your time, and I just want to say that approaching it from the standpoint of equity, I think, is the strongest argument that we can possibly make. It is an issue of equity,
Yes.
for our kids.
All right, wonderful. All right, we'll get to work and we'll let you know where we can go from here. All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
great
Thank
week. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day.
You too.